Hello guys, welcome back. Today we're here for Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. Today we'll be going over, in what's my opinion, the optimal Trench team. First off, we'll go over Trench's leadership and unique, as well as his abilities. First we'll look at Feared Tactician, which gives Separatist allies an additional 30% max health, and max protection, as well as 30% potency, which is nice. But they also get plus 10% speed for each ally with tech, and each enemy with extortion. After that comes whenever a Separatist ally inflicts a debuff on an enemy, they get 20% offense for 3 turns, stacking once per turn. And then while a Separatist ally has a tech, they have 100% potency, which is good for the potency for the team. And whenever a non-Genosian Separatist ally gains Backbite Shield Generator tech, they dispel stealth from themselves. And while they have it, they are immune to stealth and gain 100% critical avoidance and defense. And for the last part of his leadership, whenever a Separatist ally has a heal over time, they get 30% counter chance, which is nice for the team to kinda get, but 30% isn't really high. But then while they have a protection over time, they get plus 30% defense band, which helps the team with the damage. And whenever an enemy is burning, they can assist, so it works like a daze, counter attack, where gain burn and stamina, which is just days pretty much. And next up will be I Smell Fear, and its smell is good. At the start of battle, Admiral Trench loses 50% max health and gains that much max protection, which with Trench, he's even at gear 12, pretty beefy when it comes down to protection, like not much health at all. As well as while Trench is active, Separatist allies gain another 50% additional potency, so the debuffs are really landing. He gains a protection overtime 2% at the start of his turn, and then while he has said protection up, he is immune to buff immunity and heal immunity. Next up would be the first time each enemy loses all protection, at the end of that turn they are feared for 1 turn, which can't be dispelled, evaded, or resisted, so this does give them some plug and play if you slap them on a team that can actually make use of that. And the next up is whenever another non-droid Separatist ally is damaged by an attack, defeated, or evades, Trench has a 50% chance to gain 100% turn meter, which is just a coin flip but makes it somewhat consistent. And then whenever an enemy dispels protection up from Trench, they are then inflicted with shock. Next up is Trench's Unfinished Business, which does special damage to target enemy, and you shock them for 2 turns. If the target was already shocked, stun them for 1 turn. And then during Trench's turn, allies of Tactical Supremacy gain a heal overtime protection overtime, which is, extra defense penetration, extra counter chance, which is always nice, as well as some healing thrown there. And the next up is Net Positive, which is, a buff dispel. Only a single buff dispel, which isn't the best, but it's something. Does special damage to the target enemy, inflicts them with stagger for 2 turns, and equals all other non-droid Separatist allies to assist, which is just a good mass assist in general. And the non-droid Separatist allies also gain Tactical Supremacy for 2 turns, which can't be copied, and then Trench gains protection up 40% for 2 turns, and other Separatist allies gain protection up 20% for 2 turns, so extra survivability just got fed to the team. And Tactical Supremacy does 30% critical damage, which is good for damage, even more potency to give them, and at the start of their turn, they recover 10% protection. And if this is dispelled, they gain 40% health back, advantage, and foresight for 2 turns, so adding more to the survivability. Now, all this works really well with the other Separatists when we look over at Newt, who's arguably one of the best people with Trench. First ever, work over with Viceroy's Reach. Whenever a Separatist ally inflicts a debuff, they also do 5% max health damage to that enemy, so Trench had some debuffs in his kit. Most Separatists inflict debuffs. This is a good way to shoot through an enemy unit if they're in your way. I also forgot to mention it can't be evaded, so always good to have unevadable damage. But next up is enemies of Extortion have minus 30% speed, which is actually really good. Because, there's no anti-GL clause in this, so you can pull back a GL speed, so if they're like 600 speed like I think GL Honda can get, they can lose 180 speed. And this also doesn't state that it can't work with speed down, which someone in Trench's team actually has that. But not only that, it's decreased offense, so, someone like GOA has this, that all hits less harder, which gives you more survivability, and it allows you to give, not exactly an offense down on any enemy attacker, but it would also stack with offense down, so you could pull back the offense by 80% if you did slip an offense down on him. Newt also has the first time he is defeated, he is revived with 100% health and 10 meter. So essentially, it's like he has a bonus turn, although I think anti-TM teams will prevent that. And every time Newt Gunway is revived, he gains stealth for 2 turns, Next up, we'll go over to what I was actually mentioned not that long ago, the speed down on this team in Dubious Dealings, which also has the extortion nicely. General extortion gives the enemy an ability. If they do it, you get 10% critical chance of critical damage, and they recover a little bit of health. But aside from that, if they already had extortion, you grant to the weakest enemy that does not have it. But then you inflict speed down on all enemies 2 turns. This doesn't require any enemy to really have extortion, which is good. Since then speed down is paired with Viceroy's Reach, you can give an enemy unit minus 55% speed, which makes them really slow. Like if you're facing any enemy that's 300 speed, give them minus 55 speed. They're underneath 150 speed. Trench's team can easily get to about the 330-ish range. General Extortion grants extra speed to your team. Essentially, you could easily push yourself taking 2 turns to the 1 or even 3, maybe 4 if they're insanely slow. But not only that, he also does 20% max health damage to enemies with extortion as long as you have this ability maxed. Which is an Omega, so you don't really need it. You already get most of what you need without it. And that would be it for Dubious Dealings. Next up will be Hard Bargain. You deal physical damage to target enemy. If the target had extortion, you will reduce the cooldown of Motivate by 1. Which this works pretty well with Trench, because Trench can call in new. It gives you a singular buff to spell like Trench, which isn't the best, but it's something at least. And target enemy has the cooldowns increased by 1. So this is really good, because you can do this to any character in the game that doesn't have anti-cooldown manipulation. So like, if you want to jack cooldowns on like a cat, assuming that you can either target them, this could work. And the next up, if the target had extortion, which, if you're going to be insanely faster than the enemy team, extortion won't be too hard to really start getting out there consistently. This functions as another swamp for all Separatist allies, which is really good, because as we mentioned, a lot of them have debuffs. This can really easily start doing a good chunk of damage to them, with the 5% health damage. Next up was Django. He is actually one of the few consistent people you want on the team, since he's your main source of damage. First and foremost, we'll go over his notorious reputation, which has a Zeta. You don't really need it, but it's something. But let's go over his actual kit. Django has 100% defense penetration, which, they took that away from several other units, but Django was allowed to keep it, because at the time they took it away from others, he wasn't exactly doing much with it. And he also gets 50% max health, which is actually pretty good. And at the start of the encounter, whenever you get a face enemy, Django Fett covers 100% protection and gains Bounty Hunter's Resolve until he is defeated. Bounty Hunter's Resolve is just like another revive. He can ignore taunt and all that, which is always nice. Next up, we'll look at Django Fett's payout, which he does have activated when he's underneath any Separatist lead. When the leader is another Separatist. Django Fett gains damage immunity for 2 turns, which can't be dispelled with advantage, so this is one of the reasons why you can't really send CLS at any team with Django on it unless you let him get out of damage immunity, because then you're keeping him in damage immunity for the entirety of the battle. But he also winds up getting a whopping 50% offense, which paired with his teleportation, giving you 100% defense penetration, and the solid offense increases in Trench's kit, unless I'm hit pretty hard. Next up, we'll look at Shrapnel Blast, which isn't bad, but isn't exactly the best move. It's good for healing immunity and stagger. It can hit up to 2 enemies, where you normally want to hit the same enemy. But that doesn't always happen, because it is a random enemy. But yeah, that's pretty much it. It does hit pretty hard though, which is always good. And then next up is Conflagration, which is actually really good for him, because this helps with some of the team's counters. First and foremost, we'll look at the Burning, which works with Trench's kit, because you stop DM counterattacks and attacks out of turn. You deal physical damage to all enemies. None of this is evadable. And then Conflagration on the target character, they lose 25% max health stack if they were suffering a debuff. So this is good, because in the raid count, you can actually pull back Ezra's health right away, because Exile is classified as a debuff. Less health than Ezra, more likely for you to send a rocket at him and get him out. But next up is also, if you do it on a raid boss or Galactic Legend, they lose 10% tenacity, which I'm not even sure if that's really even effective on a raid boss, but Galactic Legend isn't that bad. And next up, it will be the last part of Django's kit, which is Unscrupulous Gunfire, which is another offense increase in this kit pretty much. When he does it, deal physical damage to target enemy and gain 15% offense for each enemy suffering a debuff. And then that was it for Django. Next up, we'll look at the one person not many people actually use with Trench, even though he's actually really good for them, is Geonosian Brood Alpha. First and foremost, we'll go over the key part of why he's really good with them, and that is Queen's Will. Ignore the Genosian Boot Alpha 6 Nasty, that's good, but not really that good at the same time. But all Genosian allies will get the Hindmark debuff, which actually works when you take into account that you summon a brute at the start of the encounter that will pre-taunt. Now, what does this mean? Well, if you keep the brute taunting, if Wei wants to chuck a whirlwind, it's going to get rid of them, no one actually important. When Ezra does his slip and slide, he has to slip and slide on the brute, because he can't just ignore taunt, meaning no one's going to get stunned. But not only that, if you take it against JMK, Cat is forced to leap out the brute, which doesn't really benefit the counter for JMK's team. Also, whenever a Genosian ally is defeated, you reduce the cooldown of conscription, so you take him out, he gets conscription back faster. So also look at Hive Mind as well, because just means Geos assist whenever they do an ability for 50% less damage, and they also health equalize, meaning the brute's a little bit tankier, especially when paired with the fact that Trench will increase brute's durability with the protection up and his leadership. Also go over conscription. You dispel all debuffs on all Genosian allies, so this is good in the event that your brute has a buff immunity. But not only that, you summon a brute to battle if there is one in the available ally slot, and if the brute's already present, he gets critical damage up, offense up, and then all Genosian allies gain 15% turn meter and recover 35% health and protection. And next up will be Glaive Sweep, which is not bad. You dispel all buffs on all enemies, which is really good. Deal physical damage to all enemies, and then expose them for 2 turns, which if you expose the whole entire team, that's 5% health damage across the board. And you also take away 15% turn meter from debuffed enemies, which is always nice to have. And then the second to last is Shield Bash. Deal physical damage to target enemy, and expel all buffs on them if it were a critical hit, which is nice, but not the best thing in the entire kit. And last but not least will actually be the Summon Genosian Boot. When he does his basic, Golden Strike, he deals physical damage to target enemy for 1 turn, and he taunts. And then when he does his special Swarm Tactics, he deals physical damage to target enemy, and he calls all other Geos to assist. There's no damage penalty on that, I believe. And this next part is Reckless Retaliation, which Genosian Boot has 25% offense for each active Genosian ally, and 100% counter chance, to drag out the battle more, which is always nice to have. And that will actually be it for looking at the 4 key members to this trench team. Next up, we'll go over the 2 dependent members and go over which counters you'd want to use them for. First, starting with Wat Tambor. First, we'll go over Wat Tambor's kit. Binary basic. During Wat's turn, he can dispel all debuffs on target ally. If he had any debuffs, he has meal over time. Out of turn, he applies 2 dots, which is extra health base damage from new. And he removes 15% turn meter, which makes it good for control. Next up is Discharge Energy, which revives a random Separatist or Darkside Droid ally at 100% health, and you grant all allies protected over time 30% for 2 turns. As well as trigger the healing of all heal over time buffs on all allies, and the damage of all damage over time effects on enemies. Next up, we'll go over one of Wat's uniques, Overseer, which at the start of battle, other Separatist and Darkside Droid allies gain max protection equal to 30% of Wat's max health. So modding them for health gives your team a decent bit of protection, which, was he how healthy go? He's kinda healthy. And then all Separatist and Darkside Droid allies gain 30% critical avoidance while they have a heal over time. And then whenever an ally with tech uses a special ability, Wat is called to assist. If there's, no ally combatants, Wat just dips. Next up will be one of Wat's most important features about him, which is Mass Manufacture. At the start of battle, he takes a bonus turn. If you don't have Zeta, he gets 30% turn meter, which gets him out quicker. But whenever he uses a piece of tech, the target other allies gain its effects until defeated or the end of battle. Good to go down if each tech is set to max, so you can't just spam out the same tech or get like a full team with it. Now let's go over what each tech does, starting with the True Route Med Pack. You recover 5% health and protection at the start of every character's turn, and 5% bonus protection if this character is a Separatist, which makes it pretty good for beefiness. Next up is Bactoid Shield Generator. At the start of turn, recover 30% protection and dispel own debuffs, thanks to why they have the protection. And next up is Blast Tech Weapon Mod, which gets you 15% turn meter at the start of each enemy's turn, and enemies defeated by this character can't be revived, which is pretty nice for keeping up with the enemy, and it's an extra way of preventing revives. And the next up will be Count Dooku, which will start with his Flawless Repost. If you have his Zeta, he'll have 100% counter chance. In addition to the attacks out of turn, he deals 30% more damage, which is good. Gains 50% turn meter, recovers flex, and he gets critical hit immunity. Although if you're like me and don't have the Zeta, he just gets the turn meter and does 15% more damage. Next up is his Master of Makashi. We'll go over. Can't do it, so all debuffs on himself, which is nice. Gains repost for 2 turns. All non-tank super sailors gain 15% turn meter and stealth. There's a slight little turn meter push, and Dooku is pretty fast, so you can use this to help get your team out over, get a little edge on the enemy team. And if we post when you attack out of turn, you can no protection, which is nice. Next up will be Dooku's first lightning. You shock the target enemy, which is good of Trench, because in that you can provide an extra stun. You deal special damage, and you can stun them for 1 turn. And then this attack has a 50% chance to shock and stun another random enemy, which is pretty nice. And the chance is doubled if the target is Galactic Republic. And last but not least in Dooku's kit is Hinduan Press. You deal physical damage to target enemy with a 50% chance to attack again, so that's nice. This is doubled if the target is Galactic Republic. And these attacks have a 50% chance to inflict stun and ability block for 1 turn, which, can't be countered with either, which is always nice. And then that will be it for Trench's team. Now we'll go over what team you want to build for specific counters. Now, with the first hero that we're going over is GLA. If you want to take Trench against her, you will want Dooku on the team over Watt, since Dooku provides the necessary control to control any Ezra, and you can also keep away ability block, preventing well ones and allowing your brute to stay up. But this team also works really well paired, with Newt pulling back Rey's offense, and Brood providing an extra member to the team, which makes Rey's alt hit a lot less harder. This should make any Rey counter much more consistent. And the next up is the Jabba counter. I'd say if you want to make the Jabba counter more consistent, you want to throw Watt in instead of Dooku, since he provides the team an extra revive, more extra speed at the start of the battle, since he has 3 tech. If you pass out 1 at the start of the battle, that's 10% speed. If your Newt's like 350, he gets an additional 35 speed, which makes him pretty quick, and you might just outrun the Jabba's team. Push your team an additional 10% speed and reduce Chrysanthemum's speed, which is nice. It should also allow you to start getting more turns, and should allow you to potentially get shock over on to Chrysanthemum. Once you got shock on, if your Brute actually goes next, not Brute but Brood, you can buff the spell, and then you can proceed to start going to town on Leia, which, once Leia's out, Trench's team can assist, and essentially at that point you pick off the attackers with your solid offense gains and decent speed. And then after that, you pretty much have Jabba to get through, which isn't impossible for this team. And then the last jail on this list, which I have at the possible here, is JMK. They have the Pretor in the way to eat up the cat leap. Although for this count, you would want Watt for the extra revives. Now, I haven't been really successful with really getting through it, but I have had my Trench team survive for at least 3 minutes against JMK, which is actually really good given that my Trench is Gear 12 and my Brute is also Gear 12. So at higher relics, they should have more of a chance. And for the last 2 teams that I have down here, I decided to slap together 2 defensive teams, assuming you don't want to use Trench on offense. With the first one being, practically he can function as a C lifter. If C, he slips out his link, sucks off the enemy's protection. When that occurs, they get feared from Trench because of his unique, which is actually really good. You take Sensori at this, C guaranteeingly takes 2 turns, gets a link, and gets another link. If he links up 2 key members, your Zoe train ain't nearly as strong, because once they are feared, you're going to stop, and by the time they are feared, C probably hits his ult, but is not good for you, because then he pops off an ultimate and your team dies. But the team should also stop Wampa, Imperial Troopers, Savage, stuff like that, since, anytime you smack a separatist, Trench gains a 50% chance to get 100% turn meter. This will complicate Imperial Troopers, and this should also complicate Zoe, because, you have to go on the Brute first. If Trench goes, as long as a shock or a stun on someone, that's actually important, where it does depend on who your 5th hero is. If you slap in Dooku, you can get a terrible stun on someone. You slap in Django, he might just rocket someone out. And all this is actually pretty nice as well, because if you want to take it into territory-wise, Trench actually is unique. There's no all separatist clause. He gets all of this stuff here, which is pretty good. But the point is, this makes C a much more better defensive team, while making this cost mildly more than what other counters, because those counters would have way more of a risk. And the next up is Trench's actual own defensive team, which would be best of this, which is Admiral Trench, Brood, Soldier, and Dooku. Now, I did forget to mention why Soldier would be important to see, but I'll go over that now, and that is because Soldier's basic gives a tenacity down, as we went over with Brood, with Queen's Will. Everyone gets Hive Mind, meaning, yeah, all these additional chances for the tenacity down to apply. And Dooku comes in, he'll shut down any Wampa, except during this DC season, which wouldn't be a bad cost if someone sent to that U-Trench this season. With this, and he has this as well to boot. So pretty much it's really not good for Wampa. And it could also pose a complication to some other teams like Imperial Troopers, because if you proc Trench's 100% 10 meter with going against Imperial Troopers, if he gets his swarm off on Piet, Piet isn't naturally a thickish unit. He might have a chance of dying if you have Django here, because just all the damage that you're laying out. And then yeah, that will be it for today, guys. Till next time.